So this is interesting. If I check the dashboard from last month, I had almost 40,000 views. And if I go down, and this is quite interesting, you will see that 1100 persons, 1099 persons are coming from Indonesia, and only 70 from Holland. This is interesting. Nigeria 37, Malaysia 19, Belgium 18. But this is interesting because it means that most people who view my posts are coming from Indonesia. And it tells me a lot about the difference of culture between the collectors and the people who want to work with the real energy of the kris. And of course, a lot of people claim that they've got something or feel something about the energy of the kris. I'm talking about the collectors, but I'm not a collector. I'm a cultural activist, and I really like to keep the tradition of the kris alive. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. And there was something typical when I checked the statistics of Facebook, and I saw that most of the people who followed my posts are coming from Indonesia, and only a small part are coming from the Netherlands, where I live. From the beginning on, I didn't have a good connection with the collectors. And what a collector does not understand, if I collect, let's say, paintbrushes, it doesn't mean that I'm a good painter. There are two totally different things. And I even see that some of the collectors, they get annoyed or irritated when I post something about the kris, because they simply do not understand that if you collect a kris, it doesn't mean that you're good in handling a kris. And the knowledge of the kris is not about the science, but it's about the use of the kris. Like the person who is collecting brushes or things like that is a better painter than, let's say, Picasso or Rembrandt. That's totally not true. There are two different things. And of course, kris like this. This is the kris from the Wedono of Prajakan, a male kris, and it's coming from the Kabupaten, the palace of Prajakan. And kris like this with a pendok of silver and ivory. Of course, people think that these are the nicest kris to see. All the craftsmanship on the kris, etc. And sometimes a lot of collectors, they feel something on the kris, but keeping kris in a good condition is not giving it oil and washing it in warangan. That's bullshit. You have to feed the kris. It's like an electric car. If you don't load an electric car, the energy is gone. So after a while, you have to give sajen. That's the energy for the kris, and that keeps the kris, the energy of the kris alive, not the oil of the incense. That's not true. And when I first met some collectors, it was strange for me, because I wanted to talk about the energy of the kris and what you feel and the beautiful stories of the kris. And only when I went to Indonesia, that's when people understood me. I've seen the collection of Queen Ratu Anita. If you have the chance to visit her museum, well, you will see the most beautiful pusaka over there. I've seen the collector of Professor Dr. Kiai Lesmana, beautiful collection. And you know, that's the difference. And I know that a lot of people think that if you've got a lot of knowledge of the kris, then you're the king. But I've got the feeling of the kris. It's about keeping the traditions alive. You know, I'm not a collector. I'm a cultural activist. I want to keep the tradition of the kris alive. That's what I do. And if I annoy or irritate some collectors, I don't mind. I really don't mind. Just like as if you are collecting car doesn't mean that you're a very good driver of the car. No, that are two different things. And that's the big thing, you know. If I check some websites about collectors of the kris, it's only about, oh, beautiful, nice, you have to wash it, and oh, change the mendak because it should have a mendak like that from that area and that time. It's not true. What you do is you break off the history of a kris, because when I am born in Madura and I go to Solo, then it's very plausible that you see both characteristics in a kris. Not only the things from Madura, but also when you move to, let's say, Solo, and if you buy a mendak, you buy a mendak from Solo. It's quite simple, so don't change it, because you're going to change the history of the traveling of the Javanese people who has been wearing the kris. And I know that a lot of people, especially in the kris collectors, you know, they've got one thing. It's not only collecting, it's also discussing about the kris. You don't discuss, you feel, and it's a feeling. It's something that's deep inside, and believe me, you do not feel an energy in an electric car if you don't load the car. You have to load them with Sajen, and then you've got the spirit of the kris. And that's the difference. That's why a lot of people from Indonesia, they understand what I'm doing. Like I don't understand what collectors are doing. And when I went to Indonesia, I've seen that a lot of kris, simply fake kris, are being mailed old. And all the collectors, they want to believe that they've got something good. And they will even protect the scammers who make the falsifications of the kris, because they want to believe that they've got the real stuff. That's the difference in culture, you know. That's the difference in culture. But also things like, you know, this is a nice example of a kris. Standard from the Keraton of Sumenep. And if you look at the bottom, you see a little dance. Check what they do in Suro. You will see that they walk close to the ground with the kris behind them, and then they start meditating like I'm sitting, and you always see a little dance. That's something that you are having a real kris. And when there's not a dance, it means that it has never been worn. Well, a beautiful kris should be worn. It are the, you know, the holy kris that you keep in a box and you don't take out, you know. But also things like pieces of metal that has nothing to do with the standard of some kind of keraton, you know. Like this one. This is a very, very powerful one. But you can see it already. Don't forget that the black spots over here, the swart pieces over there, the black things, that's a ghost. There is a ghost inside of the wood already. And also in the handle. And if you check the blade, it's a very, very, very old kris, you know. Absolutely not interesting for a collector, because this is not, it has nothing to do with the standard of the keraton, because that's their way of talking about the kris. But this is kris, I can tell you, this is a real kris, you know. This gives an energy and you feel it when you take it out. This is what I'm talking about. And that's why a lot of people, only 70 people here in Holland, a lot of people do not understand what I'm doing with the kris. And when I post something about the kris, it are the Indonesians who understand what I'm doing. A kris is not the knowledge about the pamor, tanggu or whatever. It's about knowing how to handle the spirit of the kris, how to keep it alive, and ask the spirit to help what you are doing or plan to do. And that's the big difference. And that's why a lot of people in Indonesia understand what I'm doing. And that's what I like to talk about, because we have to keep the tradition of the kris alive. Not the kris as an artificial object, that's also very good. But we have to keep the tradition, because that's the difficult part of the kris. Thank you for the applause.